Hi, and welcome to this episode in where we're going to refactor our US Postal Service app and looking to see how to add some events. This app is slowly taking shape and might actually turn into something useful. And in the last episode, we looked at it. We turned on all the code analyzers and fixed all the issues there. If you haven't seen that episode, I suggest go back and look at the code analyzer episode. It's actually quite interesting. But even with all that taken care of, the code is perhaps not as beautiful as it can be yet. And we have to consider to be a good app citizen. And what does that mean? The good app citizen is an app that people can extend. So we already working with the concept of we're extending the base app, but what if somebody has our app installed and they want to extend it? Perhaps they get another field from US Postal Service that they need to use, or they have an address in a custom field or something like that. So how do we actually make sure that our app is a good app citizen and can be extended? And one of the things that we need to consider is that we need to add some events to our app, and perhaps going through and refactor the code unit and adding the events at the same time is a good approach. So yeah, let's try it out. So I have here, this is my good old trusty Visual Studio Code, and I have the app in here. And today we're going to focus on the management code unit. And just to repeat, what do we have in here? We have a function called apply address that takes a comparex. So this is the result from US Postal Service. And with information on where we were, and then it's basically applying the fields to that one. So that's one place we need to look. And then we have a function called verify vendor address, and the same thing, verify customer address. And this function kind of prepares the comparex, and then it calls a function called prepare XML, and that's actually what we have down here that we made in some of the first episodes. So this one, as when we created the function to begin with, prepared the XML, and then it calls the web service, and then it handles the result. And at the end we have some helper function, get field bool, get field, add field. So these are kind of helper functions for handling the XML. And I think we need to let's look at these functions from the top. Let's look at it from the top. So a typical place where code is blooming, code is expanding, is as soon as we have a case statement. And one of a good rule, and I think this was actually, and I'm wearing that t-shirt today, I should have, some of the old NASA programming guides told that if a function was more than a page, then it should probably be separated into smaller functions. And in that concept, 25 lines was a page on the old terminals. And I think there's something about that rule, meaning that if something is bigger than you're able to read it easily, then there's potential that it can be trimmed down to something else. So if we look at this function, we can see that, and as soon as we have a case function, this is where stuff typically happens, that case customer, do, case vendor, do. So how about we grab this? And we have the AL Code Actions extension installed in our Visual Studio, so we can just mark these functions and say extract to procedure, and we will call this apply to customer rec. And this one just takes that, and we can see we get the squiggly lines because now we have all the code analyzers running, and we don't need the begin end because there's only one statement here. So let's get rid of that, and we'll do the same thing with the vendor. So, and I'll show the result in a second. So we'll call this apply to vendor rec. And we get the same squiggly lines, so let's get rid of that. Oops, oh, there we go. And these variables we don't need anymore. So now this function from being a whole page is now basically 7 lines. So let's go and see how are these functions looking now. So these are the functions that are created by the AL Code Actions. Apply customer takes a vendor rec, or takes a compare rec, and have the variable created and the lines we added. So this is perfect. We're not actually touching the compare rec, so there's no reason for us to var call that one. Otherwise, I think these functions looks almost perfect, because what if somebody created a table extension and added a new field to this one because they had another field on a customer table they want to add. So what we need to do is basically supply an event saying that somebody should be able to do customer some field. Oh wow, there we go. Some field equal compare rec some other there we go, some other field. We should be able to have people do this, and the way we do that is by adding an event. So I'll just add it here, then we can beautify it and put it at the end of the object afterwards. So in this case, I actually use the snippet just because, hey, it's easy. And you get into the question if you want to have a integration event or a business event, and what's the difference, and what is the difference? So according to Microsoft, let's start by that. A business event is a custom event that is raised by AL code. It defines a formal contract that carries an implicit promise not to change in future releases. It is the expectation that business events are published by solutions, ISVs, including Microsoft. So that could be us. If we are planning to put this into AppSource, then we are an ISV. So let's scroll down and look at the integration event. An integration event is also a custom event that is raised by AL code, like a business event, except that it does not carry the same promise of not changing, nor does it have the restriction not to expose implementation details. So with that in mind, maybe we should actually just do integration events, because we might change stuff, even though we promise not to. So we'll do integration events. An integration event have two parameters here on the attribute, and the first one is including sender. And including sender means that you actually get the code unit as a variable on the event subscriber. If our code unit had global variables in it, had a state, meaning that if you create a code unit as a variable, call one function, that function sets some global variables inside the code unit, and then later on you call another function to the same code unit, and you expect those global variables to be working. Then you need to be able to reference that specific instance of the code unit. And that's one of the many reasons not to have global variables in your code units. Just don't. I could do a whole video on just not having global variables, but in that case, we will not have include sender, and there's no reason to have access to global variables. So this is easy. We will call this procedure before modify customer. And what do we need? We need a customer rec, just let's call it customer record customer, and we need the compare, and let's use the official term is the address verify. So we'll call the US Postal Service address verify, and this is also a record, US Postal Service address verify, and that's it. So now we can go up here and say before modify customer, we pass the customer variable, we pass our compare rec, and that's it. Now we have an event that people can subscribe to. So this is pretty good. Very quickly, let's do the same thing for before modify vendor, and this is one of the greatest risks there is. Copy pasting code and not remember to change everything, but I think in this case we are good. So before modify vendor, we pass the vendor, we pass the compare rec. Boom, there you go. So now we have two events, and to keep our code in line with how this is normally looking if Microsoft wrote it, we will put the events at the end of our code unit. Doesn't really matter where they are, but right now we're putting it here. So it's right here. Okay, let's go back up. So we're good. Apply address is beautiful. One more comment is that these functions are now local because they are getting called from this one. We may want to change them to give people access to it or not. So right now they're local. So let's continue. Verify vendor address. What do we have in here? We have basically the opposite function, right? So we need to create a compare rec. But if we remove everything from this function, then the function itself would be the new function. So maybe let's wait with this one for a second and head into the prepare XML instead. Because this is clearly, this function is not prepare XML. We could start, and I don't think this is where we end, but let's start with that and say call US Postal Service web service. US Postal Service web service, and let's add a call. There you go. So now at least our function is kind of making sense. We could actually take all this that we created in the first episode, I think, and extract that to another procedure. And let's call this prepare XML. You see what I did there? So what we initially actually used the function for, we're extracting that out. So we're actually preparing the XML here. And compare it, set up parameters. So let's figure out if this is what we need, and we might be in trouble. Notice this is actually beautiful. Notice that the AL code actions inserts the procedure it just extracted before the events we added to the end. So this shows a clear understanding on how a typical code unit looks. So that's just awesome. Those little details, I love it. Let's see what we have here. So we have an address. We prepare this. This is var. We get the setup into it, so we're not changing setup, so no reason to var transfer that. We're not touching the compare rec either. We're just grabbing data from it, so no reason to var transfer that. Let's go back up and look at our function. So now we have two functions called call web service. That's perhaps not the greatest either. So this is good. Yeah, and then let's encapsulate. Not encapsulate. That's the wrong word. But let's take the latter part of this thing and do the, oops, there we go. Let's do that again. See if I am better at selecting stuff. We'll do the exact same thing here. So we had prepare XML, process result. How about that? So this one is call US Postal Service web service, and then it has a call web service inside. So the actual call web service is just a technical call. So perhaps let's make this not local, because we could potentially expose this to other, and then simply call this verify address. And always, see, I almost forgot it, use the rename. No, because we already have a verify address. So let's do verify address with US Postal Service. Okay, so this one, now you see there's some variables that are no longer in use because they're actually used by the functions. So they have been moved to the underlying function, so we can get rid of those. We get the squiggly lines that they're no longer in use. So this looks good, this looks good. So let's talk about the prepare XML. Do we need to add something here? And I think we do. So let's go one step back for a second. So we had verify vendor address and verify customer address. We need to, if the opposite of getting a field back is getting a field into this one. So basically we need to add another event here saying and this will be on after applying vendor to address verify, and we get a address verify. That's our record. Let's see if you guys can see this. Sorry, US Postal Service and the vendor. In this case, we need to do the same thing. Record vendor. So that somebody who has more fields will be able to do this. And I'll do the exact same thing. Customer, and you guys can see this. I remember to customer. So now you can, if we come in with a custom fields, and we have added custom fields to the compare, people can populate those through this event. So when we're in the prepare function, we need to, in the prepare function, we need to give them the chance to fill out, stop doing this. Yes, please. There we go. So this again. So we need to be able to handle the XML, and the problem is that there might be multiple places that we want. So I guess the easiest way would be to create a event here saying after adding fields to XML, and we need to add the address structure and the compare rec. So now we can try something slightly different. You see, this is again the power of the AL code actions, that now we can actually just ask this one to create an integration event for us. Let's go and look, and bam, we have that, the XML element and the compare rec. I like to do this, but other than that, it's perfect. So now, hopefully you guys can follow. So now people have the ability to basically get the data all the way inside the XML structure that we are sending to US Postal Service. So the next step would be to make sure that we also process the result. So we'll do the same thing in our process result function. So we're on after applying result. We're applying result to address. So now that's kind of ambiguous. On after getting data from US Postal Service. I think that's should be. So we have our compare rec, and what we have is result, and that's our XML document. So we'll use the exact same thing again here, create an integration event. We have that. And I think now we actually added events enough for people to be able to create a new extension that takes our extension, add some extra fields, and apply that throughout our process. Let's repeat that because this video is getting quite long. So let's just talk for a second here. That what we tried to do, what I tried to do, I maybe go back and clean some of this up a bit after the video, but I wanted to make the functions smaller. I wanted to make sure that we had one function that did one thing, and then I wanted to make sure that whenever I pass data throughout the system, I created events so people could add data, could make field transfers, could extend what we're doing here. So in one of the another reason for creating these smaller functions and more dedicated function is that, what we're going to do in a later video at some point, is when we start to create a test environment for this. So we need to create a test unit, and it's much easier to test these smaller functions that are doing one thing, and not a monster function that does a whole lot of stuff in a row. So with this, I'm going to end this video here, and hopefully you guys are actually kept watching to the end, because thanks. And let me know in the comments below if you think I missed something, or I should use totally different names for the events or the functions or stuff like that. And if you like videos like this, subscribe to the channel. There's lots more coming, and let me know if there's something else that you want me to do a video on. I continue to update this app, and hopefully this will end up in AppSource at some point. That would be quite awesome if we did that together. So until next time, have a wonderful day. Take care, guys.